are the suppression efforts for civilian scientists and academics who come across the so-called zero-point free energy quantum vacuum phenomenon outside the United States meet the same fate as the ones in the States. Sure, of course. And those are absolutely tracked. One thing I will say, I don't want to discourage people from doing their R&D, right? But when you hit that frequency, think about it. You're there, you're at Lawrence Berkeley Labs, a man I know was there, did this. And he was working, Mark Cummings, physicist, great guy. He was going to marry Dr. Russell Targ's daughter, and unfortunately she got a brain tumor. But wonderful guy, and I've spent a lot of time with him. But he was at Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and what he was doing, he was simply doing some experiments with crystalline forms, and CIA people hate when I tell you this, barium titanate crystals that would then have a coil around it. And there was an input signal, electromagnetic, electrical with high voltage, very low current at certain frequencies. We're talking millions of volts, but at very low power. So, static electricity, we get zapped when it's dry and cold, that's millions of volts, by the way, but very low currents. That's why you're not electrocuted. Understand? Because power is voltage times current. You can go look it up in your textbooks. Don't ask me why I remember these things from high school physics, but we do. The point is that once he hit that sweet point, he was getting 10 times or more power, electric power out than he was using to put in. At that instant, some folks came into his lab, suits, and they confiscated all the equipment. They forcibly made up documents to put him in a mental institution on Thorazine, which turns into sort of a vegetable, and etc. He also, so he got out and he's fine now, but that technology was gone. And he also was friends with another scientist who had developed an even more powerful system. Now, how did they know? He wasn't really talking to anyone. He wasn't a public person. He wasn't, on the local news like Stan Meyer with his water car was. It's because when it hit that frequency, there's a signature. And that signature can be picked up by the sophisticated SATs in space. So if the SATs can read the newsprint of you reading the New York Times on Mount Everest, and they can, they're not dependent on ground technology. They most certainly have sensors that can pick up when someone pings into the zero-point energy field. This is why I've told these scientists to not work covertly, quietly, secretly. I have proposed, but nobody will fund, a project that would be open source, streamed on the internet in real time, all the lab research. And the instant you hit that sweet spot, the whole world knows the intellectual property is out, it's decentralized, and therefore the scientists working on it are not longer a target because there will be thousands of scientists and universities all over the world who at the same instant, at the speed of light of the internet, will have that intellectual property. Unfortunately, the scientific and research and the garage tinkerer teams of people, they think, A, they don't know these systems exist. B, when we tell them, they don't believe it. And C, they find out once they're dead or their stuff is confiscated, their materials are confiscated. So I've been warning about this since I first spoke to Bruce De Palma in 1991, 33 years ago. And I have never found a scientist who actually knows how to build these systems who will strategically do the correct things to protect the technology. Not once, not in 34 years. There's someone out there who has a scintilla of common sense, frankly. then let me know. Now, part of the problem is everyone doesn't know what they don't know. And I freely admit when I started this project, I didn't know what TSSCI was. I didn't know what a SCIF was. I didn't know what an unacknowledged special access project was. I didn't know anything. I'm a civilian medical doctor, right? But what's important, I don't care how smart you are, is to know what you don't know and be willing to listen to experts and learn. So I did. So I had some national security people with very high clearances, read into a lot of this, put me under their wing as this young medical doctor, and I learned. This is not the case with most scientists, because if they're brilliant in one area, they conflate that brilliance across the board. And so they will not listen, and they think they know best. And mainly it's because they want to make a bunch of money. Like one of them said to me, I want to be the Rockefeller of new energy, and be a trillionaire. Well, why? You spend so much money. But that's the mindset. It's both scientific hubris combined with greed. All right. Very much a primate human problem. And that's why we don't have these technologies, because they've been invented. There are thousands of people who've invented various iterations of these technologies, all of which have vanished because they were not aware of this OPSEC, operational security and strategic issues that needed to be put in place to protect them. And even when I meet with them and I prove and I show the history of it, they just don't want to let go of their intellectual property or their attempts to get a patent and to get rich quick, right? And they're blinded by that, right? That's why in The Lost Century, the documentary we recently released, we talk about this sort of Gollum effect with the ring, my precious, my precious. And so that's what happened. So again, remember, scientists are human first, scientists second. Doctors are human first, doctors second. They want to say, I'm a scientist, so I know everything. And I make no errors because I'm completely objective. Like the lying shills in the media. Oh, I'm an objective journalist. There's no such thing as pure objectivity of any human. I mean, Spock, but not humans. And this is the Achilles heel of all the scientific community dealing with this, because they actually do believe they know best. Because they are brilliant in ways that I'm not. I'm not a physicist and I'm not an electromagnetic engineer, right? Not my wheelhouse. And I'll admit it. Don't give me these things. I mean, even my wife has to do anything electromagnetic or computer or anything in our house. I'm a complete incompetent moron. I am with this stuff. And I'll admit it. The problem is that when you don't admit your blind spots, this is where you make mistakes, right? You need to know what you don't know and have the humility to admit it. But this is a very rare trait amongst inventors, scientists, academics, and people who've invented something. And a good friend of mine who was a venture capital guy once said, there's an inverse relationship there's a direct relationship between how important the invention is and how crazy the inventor gets, right? And so the more important the breakthrough is, the crazier the inventor gets. We call this crazy inventor syndrome. And I've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times in 30 some years, and which explains why, even though I've seen these devices and I've seen them operation, none of the people who have them want to bring them out in a way that would actually succeed, because they don't understand the security risks and the strategic needs of doing so. They just think, I'm going to build a better mousetrap and the world's going to beat a path to my door, right? Well, that's true if you're inventing an app or a new iPhone or something that's, quite frankly, trivial and of no significance. But when you're doing something that's going to upset $1,000 trillion of assets and the entire global world macroeconomic order, you cannot treat that technology as if you would treat an app or a new computer system, you see. And they don't understand that. They do not understand the national security and global security implications of their little invention. So to answer your question, yes, these are tracked globally. They're a system to detect when they're operational. If they are not detected that way, once it is, if you send one text or one email, even if it's encrypted on the best encrypted sites, the organization I'm talking about will know about it and they'll watch it. Now, they'll leave the person alone if what they have is a fraud, 90% of these devices that you hear about, or if they know the person won't get out of their own way. But if it starts to emerge into the public, boom, it's gone. And they're gone often. Like Floyd Sweet, so many people who I know of or have known who are dead. I know quite a few of these inventors who have been killed because they would not take expert advice on these security and strategic issues. So again, unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you're an academic or just a garage tinkerer who comes into the breakthroughs of this, that none of those have gotten out to benefit humanity because of these tracking and surveillance capabilities and the willingness to activate wet works or hit teams. So now that's the last part of the algorithm. We'll get into this. And usually they embed someone who has a lot of money, and that person takes enough control of the company, and then they run off with it or they shut it down. And they black shelf it, put it on a black shelf, and hide it. So we have mapped out, we'll get into this, the science technology part if we have time, but we've mapped out about a dozen major predictable strategies used to suppress these technologies. And almost every single inventor since Tesla have fallen into one or more of those trapdoors. Boom, there goes the technology. Explains why we don't have these after 100 years, because I always point out, the laws of the universe are universal. And, right, science, mathematics, universal. So if it can be discovered on Alpha Centauri or in the Andromeda galaxy, it can be discovered here on Earth by the minds of people. But that's the good news. That's the beauty of science. The bad news is the foibles and the frailties of human nature that I just mentioned.
Well, why do so many scientists who discover or work on clean energy suddenly find themselves killed? Well, this is a strange story. Nunu Laero, he was until yesterday MIT's leading nuclear fusion scientist. His plasma research led to incredible clean energy breakthroughs, clean tech, no fossil fuels. He was murdered at his home on Monday. Here is the news report. Shot dead at 47 years old, Nunu Laero. Am I saying that right? The Portuguese?
Lareiro.
I know. I was practicing it all morning. Laero.
Lareiro.
Yeah, and I lived in Portugal for 5 years, and you'd think I'd be able to nail it. Anyway, he's from Lisbon originally. One could argue, like Tesla before his ultimate untimely death, that Nunu's plasma physics research could have changed the world. You could argue that. Sources have confirmed, to redacted, that he had made a few energy giants very nervous. It turns out that he's not the first MIT fusion scientist to suddenly be murdered in his home. In 1989, Eugene Malov exposed a cold fusion cover-up by the Department of Energy and MIT itself. There he is. He even wrote a book about it called Fire from Ice, searching for the truth behind the cold fusion furor. Before he was murdered, he talked about how threatening this research was to the powers that be.
What we really had was a threat to the scientific establishment. The threat of it even being implied as real and having monies, shall we say, being diverted from their favored programs, and that was a threat. It was real. Overwhelmingly compelling, as I said, in Fire from Ice. It was real. Now it's 100% certain.
Interesting. Overwhelmingly real. Meanwhile, so coincidence? What did Nunu know? Andrew Goff is a former History Channel host, researcher, investigator. He's also the host of Conspiracy Hour on Unified TV, and he joins me now. Andrew, great to see you. Thank you for doing this.
It's great to be on the show. Thank you.
So
this is a very disturbing story, is it not?
It is. And when you think about the laundry list of individuals, I was speaking to a source today, said it's very, very sad because, you know, look, there's a long list of individuals who've gotten very close to the sun, so to speak, where we might have free energy, and suddenly these people are murdered, or they disappear, or they're locked up and thrown in jail. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's just the latest in a long line of similar incidents, right? So anybody who has a cure for a disease. It could be cancer. It could be almost anything. It could be the individuals who find out how to power automobiles with water, not gasoline or petrol. They're murdered. They're suicided. They go missing. It's as though the establishment has a iron grip on what is allowed to be used, such as free energy. I mean, Tesla was found dead in his apartment for no apparent reason. We're not taught about things like the ether. We're not taught about what Tesla discovered. We have to kind of go and research that on our own. So it's very disturbing that Nunu has been murdered. And the question is, what had he discovered? What was he about to announce? And when you think of the fact that he was responsible for MIT fusion and plasma division, that opens up the possibilities to not just free energy, but what's plasma? What is the energy that he's studying, and has to do with the sun, it has to do with the moon, it has to do with so many things that he could have been just about to reveal. And thus, there's a good motive for silencing him.
I've spoken to sources here on the show, members of the military, members of the U.S. military, whistleblowers, and others who've worked on the secret space program. My viewers know them well. We have a big interview that's coming out this week on that topic specifically. They've seen this plasma technology in action, at least specifically within the secret space program, within the confidential halls of the military, in a military capacity or otherwise. So a civilian, by all accounts, at MIT gets close to discovering or harnessing what we already know we have. And therein lies the conflict, no?
Absolutely. And it reminds me in a way of CERN, where the stated objective is XYZ, but really they're doing something completely different. I don't know if you can recall back in the day, maybe 15 years ago, when there was a reporter interviewing the director of CERN. And she was enthusiastically saying, you've spent billions on this facility, yet the world has people who are starving and homeless. Wouldn't this money have been better spent doing some good to society as opposed to smashing atoms? And the gentleman continues to defend what the purpose of CERN is all about, to find out how the universe began. This goes back and forth and back and forth, and she's agitating him to no end. And finally, he just blurts out, well, what price would you put on time travel? And she said, did you just say time travel?
What?
And so thus, that whole interview has been scrubbed. It's gone. And you have to wonder, was Nuno really about to come forward with something to do with free energy, or was it even more abstract than that?
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
This is, I think it's time we actually said this. He disappeared. He was notified by his wife, Susan Wilkerson, I think around about 11 o'clock on February the 27th. So that's last week. And he's just disappeared. Allegedly, he'd gone for a trail run on a trail near his home in Albuquerque. I've actually been to General McCaslin's home because I once cheekily went and stuffed a letter in his letterbox. He didn't respond, but I wanted him to know that I was in town. And it was one of the people, he was one of the key people that I approached when I was doing my research for my book, In Plain Sight. And frankly, as I say in my book, if anyone knows the darkest secrets of the UAP legacy program, it is General Neil McCaslin, Major General Neil McCaslin. This guy is, honestly, he is one of the most important people in the US military establishment in terms of secret stealth programs. I was just going through it. He's held senior roles overseeing classified space weapons, advanced aerospace research programs, and he's basically most recently, he served as the head of research at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which of course is notorious in UFO lore because that is where the alleged Roswell crash remnants, the remnants from the crash of allegedly 2 UFOs that collided, were taken in 1947. He was also the commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory. He was the director of special programs in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. He was the director of Space Acquisition, Office of the Undersecretary of the Air Force. He has served, Major General Neil McCasland has served at the very highest levels of the US military, the US Air Force. And I just can't believe at the moment that the disappearance of this man is not featuring at all prominently in the national media. It's almost gone unnoticed, disregarded in the great august papers of record in the United States.
One afternoon in 1988, Adam Trombley was relaxing at his home outside Aspen, Colorado, when suddenly came an unexpected knock at his front door. It was his friend and colleague, Bob Dratch, a scientist and one of the world's premier experts on microwave technology. Dratch had just completed construction of a new microwave detection device he had invented and was eager to show it to someone who could appreciate it. Setting up in Trombley's office, Dratch stood shaking some loose change he had in his pocket as Trombley pointed the device at him. The intent was to show how the invention could detect even the minute signals the jingling coins generated. During the demonstration, Trombley haphazardly pointed the device away from Dratch and out his office window for a moment, when shockingly, the machine's alarm started going off, indicating extremely high microwave levels. The two men rushed out of the house and into a small forest which the office window faced. There, they were stunned to find a small antenna hidden amongst the trees, projecting powerful microwaves directly at Trombley's house. For Trombley, everything suddenly began to make sense. Earlier that year, he had been diagnosed with cancer, a known side effect of prolonged exposure to microwaves. But where had this antenna come from? Who had put it there? More importantly, what was Adam Trombley doing that someone would want to kill him for it? To answer this question, one must go back to the very beginning, back to when Adam Trombley was just a little boy. Growing up in the 1950s, it was not unusual for Adam Trombley to see some of the most important people in the United States in his family home. Adam's father was a biochemist and a decorated Air Force officer, a man with high-level military clearance who was often consulted by high-ranking military and government officials, even the head of the CIA, on issues of great importance. Shortly after Adam's birth, his father began working on a government project with Sidney Gottlieb, the scientist who would go on to head the CIA's infamous MK-Ultra mind control experiments. The project would experiment with LSD, that hallucinogenic drug which was drawing so much interest from the U.S. government at the time. When one of the members of the project, a man named Frank Olson, died unexpectedly, apparently by falling out the window of a hotel room, Adam's father was convinced he had been murdered for his involvement in the project, and so he ventured to file an official complaint. Not only did the complaint go unheeded, but, according to Adam's father, it resulted in something much worse. Shortly after filing his complaint, Adam's father was taken for an immunization against a new biological warfare agent, part of his position as a high-ranking military officer. Except almost immediately after receiving the purported immunization, he fell ill, convincing him that he had in fact been injected with a live virus as retribution for his complaint. A few years later, he would die of cancer. "They killed Frank, and now they have killed me," he would write before his death. Nearly a decade after his father passed away, Adam Trombley was helping his mother clean her attic when he stumbled across a box he'd never noticed before. Inside were stacks of his father's journals, written in secret and in defiance of military regulations for a man in his position. Inside the journals were words which read like science fiction. They spoke of secret government projects and unbelievable advanced technologies. Reading page after page, Adam was forced to reimagine his understanding of the world as he knew it. And reimagine he did. The discovery of his father's journals would set Adam Trombley on a path he would follow for the rest of his life. He would first become an expert in geophysics and electromagnetic systems, then an inventor, working on the types of technologies he had read about on the journal's pages. By 1980, not yet 30 years old, Trombley had invented a device which he believed would be genuinely revolutionary. He called it the closed-path homopolar generator, and he alleged it was able to produce 250% more energy than was put into it. In other words, Trombley had purportedly created a device which produced energy out of nothing. It may sound impossible. In fact, according to the laws of physics, it is. The second law of thermodynamics states that efficiencies cannot be greater than 100%. More simply, you can't get more energy out of something than you put in. However, many scientists believe this is wrong. The key, according to quantum physicist John Wheeler, is that space is not empty. It is the seat of the most violent physics. Back in the 1940s, Hendrik Casimir, a Dutch physicist, postulated that vacuums were not empty voids, as commonly believed, but rather that they contained fluctuations of electromagnetic waves. Casimir believed that by holding two metal plates extremely close together in a vacuum, these waves could be trapped between them, creating a vacuum energy which could attract or repel the plates. He called this the Casimir effect, in essence, a way to create energy out of nothing. Since initially postulated, the effect had been measured and proven by many scientists. And according to Hal Puthoff, a former engineer at General Electric and consultant to the U.S. Department of Defense, these are not just fringe scientists with science fiction ideas. They are mainstream ideas being published in mainstream physics journals and being taken seriously by mainstream military and NASA-type funders. To those who believe the concept of free energy is impossible, many have asserted that the Casimir effect is a proven example of free energy that cannot be debunked. It was this type of science that Adam Trombley was building upon in constructing his closed-path homopolar generator. And the importance of his work, according to many, cannot be overstated. In the words of former Princeton University physics professor and NASA astronaut Brian O'Leary, these technologies are absolutely the most important thing that have happened in the history of the world. By 1980, Trombley would apply for a patent for his device, believing it to be an invention which would change humanity's path. Yet, much to Trombley's great surprise, his patent application was delayed and denied, and for years he existed in a sort of limbo, impatiently sitting on a secret he believed people needed to know. Finally, in 1989, Trombley was invited to give a demonstration of his device at the United Nations, a fitting venue, Trombley thought, for a discovery of this importance. The presentation was attended by diplomats, engineers, scientists, and Wall Street executives, all with prying eyes waiting to see if what Trombley said he had created could be real. To prevent any accusations of fraud, Trombley allowed a senior engineer from Boeing to examine the device beforehand. For several hours, the engineer checked for every conceivable trick Trombley might use, but found nothing. The demonstration went perfectly, with some in the audience moved to tears, believing they had seen something truly historic. As Trombley walked off the stage, he received what one diplomat called one of the longest standing ovations in the history of the UN. It seemed Trombley's invention would finally get the attention which he believed it thoroughly deserved. But before he could celebrate, something strange caught Trombley's eye. There in the crowd of onlookers was a group of Wall Street executives, men recognized as the financial backers of inventors like Trombley, huddled around one of Trombley's closest friends. What could they be talking about? Trombley wondered. His friend was no scientist, nor even someone Trombley shared thoughts on his work with. When they finished speaking, the executives approached Trombley, looking concerned. "Your friend just told us that you faked the demonstration," one said. This stunned Trombley. He had taken every conceivable step to prove the legitimacy of his demonstration, yet it appeared to be falling apart in this single moment. How could his friend have said this, and why? The executives then informed Trombley that, since he had allegedly faked his experiment, any and all future funding for his work would be cut off. At that moment, Trombley thought he knew what had happened. His friend had appeared in his life just after he'd first filed for a patent for his free energy device. It seemed clear to Trombley that his so-called friend must have been some sort of operative who had infiltrated his life with the intent of sabotaging him at a crucial moment. Perhaps this sounds like a paranoid assertion, but remember that at the time, Trombley had already discovered an antenna projecting microwaves at his house. He was already fighting cancer. Perhaps he had a reason to be paranoid. Trombley himself admits that the story of his life sounds a bit like a bad spy novel, and in fact, it goes far beyond a microwave antenna or Wall Street executives. There was a time at the height of his research when his laboratory was ransacked. The only thing that was left was the tube of working mechanical drawings for that generator, Trombley explained, which I had hidden under a suspended ceiling before I left. Then there were, according to Trombley's count, over 50 attempts on his life, including really serious poisonings, and numerous times in which my wife has had to revive me and give me CPR. Perhaps this does sound like a bad spy novel, except for people working on the types of things Trombley was working on. These sorts of stories are not all that rare. One day, man will connect his apparatus to the very wheelwork of the universe, and the very forces that motivate the planets in their orbits and cause them to rotate will rotate his own machinery. These were the words of legendary inventor Nikola Tesla. At the height of his incredible career, Tesla was devoting much of his time to the concept of free energy, believing it possible to tap into and use the energy inherent in the universe. In 1905, he filed a patent titled The Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through the Natural Medium, and later that year finished construction of the incredible 187-foot-tall Wardenclyffe Tower in Shoreham, New York. The tower was designed to pump the natural energy of the Earth skyward, where it could be harnessed by homes and vehicles using small antennas. When just it seemed that Tesla would realize his goal, his funding was abruptly pulled. Crucially, his benefactor had been one J.P. Morgan, the financial tycoon who'd become one of the richest men in the world, largely by funding and profiting from fossil fuel companies and General Electric. In other words, Morgan had become a wealthy man off the very industries which would collapse if Tesla's free energy system ever became a reality. According to those close to the situation, Morgan did not only pull his own funding to Tesla, but purposefully scuttled any future ways Tesla could raise money. Without adequate funding, Tesla would never again reach the heights of the Wardenclyffe Tower. However, he continued to work on the concept of free energy behind the scenes and out of the spotlight. Finally, in 1943, Tesla got the break he'd been waiting for when he was able to procure a meeting with American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, during which time he would be given the opportunity to explain to the president how very real and very possible the concept of free energy really was. Unfortunately, Tesla would not make it to that meeting. Shortly before it was scheduled to take place, Tesla was found dead in the New York City hotel room he'd been living in. Immediately after his death, the room was swept by U.S. government officials who collected all of Tesla's documents and sent them directly to the FBI. What the documents contained was never revealed, only that they were, in the words of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, most secret. Is it possible that the secrets were of free energy and a technology J.P. Morgan thought he had stopped all those decades before? And are these the types of secrets that can get a person killed? At about the same time as Tesla was working on his concepts of free energy, a contemporary named T. Henry Moray was doing something similar. Moray was an electrical engineer who, in the 1920s and 30s, developed an energy device which he asserted could generate power without any human-made input. He called it the Moray valve, explaining that by tuning in to the radiant energy of the universe, the device could generate enough energy to power a small factory. By his own admission, he was greatly influenced by the work of Tesla. Throughout the 1930s, Moray gave demonstrations of his device to scientists and politicians, none of whom could detect any fraud. However, Moray had his patent applications for the device repeatedly rejected. Despite his demonstrations, he was told by the patent office in no uncertain terms that there is no such thing as free energy. Worse, his laboratory was ransacked on more than one occasion, and he was often the recipient of death threats. He even went so far as to make his car bulletproof, due, he claimed, to the many times his vehicle had been shot at by mysterious assailants in black cars. By the late 1930s, the U.S. government had ordered that engineers from the Rural Electrification Administration be allowed to work alongside Moray on the development of his device. It was one of these engineers who one day destroyed the working model of the device by smashing it to pieces with an axe. Afterwards, Moray was never able to rebuild a device because, like Tesla, he could never again obtain funding for his work. These types of occurrences around anyone proposing concepts of free energy only accelerated into modern times. Take Bruce De Palma, a Harvard-educated physicist and a professor of the subject at the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology for nearly 2 decades. In the late 1970s, as Adam Trombley was working on his closed-path homopolar generator, De Palma was constructing the first working model of an invention he called the N machine, a device which, according to him, provided a new way of extracting energy from space. Incredibly, according to his tests, the device could produce up to 5 times the energy required to run it. In 1978, a Stanford University professor of electrical engineering named Robert Kincheloe independently studied the device with a skeptical eye. After doing so, he concluded, "There is indeed a situation here whereby energy is being obtained from a previously unknown and unexplained source. This is a conclusion that most scientists and engineers would reject out of hand as being a violation of accepted laws of physics, and if true, has incredible implications." On the precipice of something extraordinary, De Palma was contacted by the CIA in 1980, the same year Trombley filed a patent for his own free energy device. According to De Palma, he was told that if he continued with his work, I would have my head blown off. Understandably fearing for his life, De Palma fled the United States for New Zealand, where he continued his work, far away from the prying eyes of the U.S. government. By 1997, he was able to complete construction of a fully functional, updated version of his N machine. He was scheduled to present an official public testing of the device in Auckland, when only 2 weeks before the presentation was set to take place, he died unexpectedly. Without its proprietor, De Palma's research and his device were disregarded. At about the same time that Trombley and De Palma were achieving their breakthroughs, another of their contemporaries was working on something similar halfway around the world. In the mid-1980s, Paramahamsa Tewari, at one time the executive director of the Nuclear Power Corporation of India, came forward with an invention he called the space power generator. By using a magnetized cylinder rotating at high speeds, Tewari asserted that he had created a device which could produce an efficiency of over 250%, in effect, creating energy from the vacuum of space. In 1986, Tewari won first prize at a scientific conference in Germany by presenting a crude facsimile of this free energy device. From there, he continued to work on perfecting the technical aspects of his device and his calculations day in and day out for many years. Finally, in 2017, he was ready. That year, he submitted a paper entitled Structural Relation Between the Vacuum of Space and the Electron to the esteemed Physics Essays journal, in which he explained precisely how electrons were birthed from the vacuum of space, a detailed roadmap of the technical aspects of free energy production. 2 weeks after this study was submitted, Tawadi suddenly died. Like Tesla and De Palma before him, he had died on the eve of the big public reveal of his life's work. Perhaps by now it is easy to see that Adam Trombley's claims of his life being like a bad spy novel are not all that ridiculous after all. Time and time again, from Nikola Tesla to Paramahamsa Tewari, proponents of free energy have been attacked, their work suppressed, their funding pulled, their lives ended unexpectedly. In fact, it appears that the suppression of free energy technology is something of an official practice. In the U.S., all patent applications fall under the jurisdiction of the Invention Secrecy Act, which states that patents can be withheld and new inventions subject to secrecy orders if they are deemed a threat to national security. In 2020, there were nearly 6,000 such secrecy orders in effect, including for the patent submitted by Adam Trombley's free energy device. But why? Why suppress and subvert something which seems like it would be so beneficial to humanity? Consider the words of former U.S. Patent Examiner Thomas Vallone, who claims the existence of a secret 9-member patent committee whose purpose is to screen out any inventions which may threaten the power of the fossil fuel companies. Remember Tesla's antagonism with J.P. Morgan, who had gotten rich off fossil fuels and electricity? Free energy not only challenges the established laws of physics, but the power structure of the entire world, a structure explicitly based on the proliferation of non-renewable energy. Certainly, it is not much of a stretch to suggest that those looking to keep their hold on power would resort to intimidation, manipulation, even murder to do so. One final thing which must be mentioned: Adam Trombley did not die of the cancer he developed as his house was being microwaved. He is still alive today, and in fact, still working on the cause of free energy through his Project Earth organization. If history is any guide, you may want to check it out while you still can.
And as we begin to go through these devices, I would just want to keep you in mind, we're just going to do there are hundreds and hundreds of them. So, T. Henry Moray had a device, no input energy once he got it set up, output 50 kilowatts. But he had multiple assassination attempts and finally was bankrupted in his lab. This was the 1930s. Next. Here's a friend of mine. He was a Wright-Patterson Project Blue Book guy. But when he retired, he built a device that you could put on the air intake of a car. This is in the 80s, where you would get anywhere from 20 to 40% more range, miles per gallon on conventional. This is not a free energy device. And reduce the emissions up to 70%. I have the patent. I have the Department of Transportation test of the U.S. government verifying it. He had his lab vandalized, everything stolen, bomb threats, etc. This is a colonel who put his entire life savings into something in the 80s that would have been a game changer. But it wasn't a free energy device. It wasn't something just running out of the 0 point. It would have just gotten more efficiency and cleaned up the air. And that caused what I call murder incorporated to threaten this man. And this guy, no crackpot. He is serious, World War II hero, and then worked in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Next. This gentleman actually took a device from a Russian immigrant and another and kind of packaged it. He didn't actually understand it that much. And he had one that was, look at this, how much energy it was putting out. It was based on a resonant field kind of harmonic. Next. And you had 26, almost 27 watts going in, 7,460 watts going out, and tested and verified by multiple labs. Long time ago. Now, unfortunately, this disappeared because he actually took the ideas from some geniuses and was trying to make a lot of money. And so his became, I'm calling this inventor syndrome. And I sort of jokingly call it crazy inventor syndrome. It's not very nice, but I mean, it's kind of crazy. And here's why it's crazy. Because what people do is that they will, they think, and we're going to get to this in a moment, they think I have the best thing since sliced bread, and the world's going to be the path to my door. And they don't realize they're going to have corrupt interests from the national security state, corporations, and all kinds of other people stop them. So they think they're going to do a normal investment and normal venture capital and patent it or keep the secret sauce of how it works away from everyone. And in every single case for 100 plus years, they've taken that knowledge to their grave. This is we got to fix. And we'll get through the strategy. And this is so beautiful. We're going to play this in a minute. You know who this is. And I say, what happens? They get indoctrinated with this idea that I'm going to get rich quick. And I'm going to do this like you invented the intermittent windshield washer and made $1 billion. That guy did. Or, you know, a new cell phone or whatever. Or a software program. They don't realize you're making a run at the foundation of a global macroeconomic power system that has 1,000 times the wealth and power of the United States government. And this is how they think, right here. So, having done that for 31 years now, I have been dealing with people with these devices since 1991. And almost all of them fall into some part of this syndrome. And it's a tragedy because you will see them, you'll see the device, I'll have engineers come in and test it. They go, oh no, I'm going to keep it secret. Nobody can know but me. And I need to make a bunch of money. They want to be the next Rockefeller of energy. And the next thing you know, they're dead, or the device is confiscated, or it vanishes in a buyout. So this guy had the same problem. This is, you go to in Switzerland. He had a device. They have it there still running. But they think that no one can know this but them. And so they keep it secret. It's all secret. They're buying into the paranoia. My answer is open source it. Dump it on the internet, blockchain, or any way you can. You have no patent, no intellectual property. The whole world knows about it, and every scientific lab in the world can reproduce it. We're going to get to this strategy in a minute. That's how we go. We got to do that. Because the very definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's attributed to Einstein. But how true is that here? You know, but most of these scientists and inventors that are working in labs or Lawrence Berkeley labs, like one guy I know, they discover this. They have no idea what the national security implications are, meaning oil and money. They have no idea the buzzsaw they're about to go through. And I hate to say it, pride goeth before a fall. It's just a disaster for them. And they don't see it coming until it's too late. So we have to change our strategy. This man's a CIA officer. I knew, but he had approached me years ago. And next, he had, interestingly, took, next, I guess they can't hear me back there. Oh, we'll just freeze here. I thought there was another slide for him. He had taken a man that you'll see in a moment, John Bedini, into an old retired schoolhouse up in the upper Midwest. I know where it is. And this guy, who is a CIA operative, actually had a device that he enticed John Bedini with. And Bedini was an electromagnetic engineer, had worked in some black projects in his early days. And he has recently passed away rather suddenly. But he was taken there, and they said, okay, they had all these file cabinets and devices stored in this remote place that had been confiscated from the late 1800s and early 1900s up until when he was there in the 80s. And they brought in a copy, or trying to recruit him. The agency, this officer, was trying to pull him into their program. And they said, we'll let you copy any of these documents and patents that we've confiscated. And the devices were there. I knew John Bedini. I was at his lab. And it's so long as you play with us, you join our team, the covert team. Bedini said no doing. They roughed him up, almost killed him. But this guy, Sajeka, there is a disk. It's encrypted. And the man who created it for us has died. But it has hundreds or thousands of pages of these confiscated patents and designs for these devices that were in that facility. We have it. I have it. I need a good decryptor right now. Next, this one I love, because Joseph Newman, this story is fascinating because he had a tiny, you know what 17 watts, like a 20-watt light bulb. It was putting out 200 watts. So there you have something that's, what is that? 15 times, 10 to 15 times more output than input. And this is in the 80s. This is 40 years ago. And here's what happened. He kept the whole thing so secret. He was going through a patenting process, but even the patent application left out a lot of the secret sauce. Most of these inventors do this. Fatal mistake. And what happened is that it was all covered up, that he actually was taken to court. Patent office said, even though he had proof that it worked from multiple very esteemed scientists, patent examiners, there was a master appointed for the court that proved that the thing actually did as he said it did, and he got nowhere. He took this to his grave. Look at this video that you're going to see in a moment.
Mr. Newman has been fighting for a patent for years. Many, therefore, considered it ironic when a federal judge appointed the former head of the patent office, William Schuyler, to decide if Newman's device did or did not work. Mr. Schuyler, who is also considered to be an expert on electrical engineering, didn't take long to make his decision. In a report of the special master, Mr. Schuyler states, evidence before the court is overwhelming that Newman has built and tested a prototype of his invention in which the output energy exceeds the external input energy. Therefore, there is no contradictory factual evidence. For the layman, that means the machine works. The expert then goes on to say, the patent office finding that such a machine is impossible is clearly erroneous. Mr. Schuyler also found that the patent office intentionally did not consider the formalities of Mr. Newman's application for a patent. Why wouldn't you go along, again, with a master that's former head of the patent office, who has credentials that the judge called outstanding? Why wouldn't you go along with the man that you recommended in granting a patent?
You ask mean questions, don't you? I think you'd have to address that question to our present commissioner.
Are you acting on his orders?
You might say that, yes.
There you go. Here's an admission. This is CBS News. It's almost 40 years ago. And the key point here is this man, like most of these, the ones who were still living when I got involved, I remember I've been briefing people like the director of the CIA since 1993. This guy called me up. He said, we really need your help. And I said, the only way you're going to do this is that you disclose it, all of it, open source it, get it out there. I will see that we get it out to the entire scientific community. He says, no. It's Gollum, my precious. And I said, dude, you're going to take this to your grave. He took it to his grave. Yep, it's gone. Nobody knew that secret sauce. Here we have a brilliant device, again, almost 40 years ago. Look at the input and output. Tested over and over again, 0.3 milliwatts. Output, 223,000 watts. That's 22.4 kilowatts. That's plenty to run your car, your Tesla motor. Now, continuously output if needed on demand. So this little thing that looks like a cigarette pack, when he died under mysterious, they said a heart attack, and he was elderly, but he had all kinds of evidence he was killed. And that little thing that you're seeing him hold, we have testimony from someone who worked with him that we just filmed last month here in LA. they were going to attach, he was working with General Motors, he could attach it to an electric motor, 300 horsepower. It's a pretty strong electric motor. By the way, electric motors, horsepower for horsepower, have more kick than a gas one if you've driven electric cars. And that's when the unbelievable attempts on his life, threats. There were photographs taken inside his house. He didn't see how those people got in there. His materials were confiscated. And unfortunately, even Lieutenant Colonel Bearden, who worked in this area for years and was been on my team for years, he never would disclose to anyone how this really worked. He took it to his grave. How many times does this have to happen? Next. And I just mentioned the Fleischmann and Pons cold fusion. Now, it didn't put out a lot of power, but what was scary is that this is 1989. It made the cover of all the magazines. The way they took that avenue of discovery out of the scientific world is that there were people who were paid, who were corrupted through scientific fraud at MIT. Next slide. Dr. Eugene Mallov, dear friend of mine. I would take devices, he would test PhD, Harvard, and MIT, brilliant man. And he was at MIT in the science office for education when he saw how they had changed the data on the reproducing the Pons-Fleischmann experiment. And he blew the whistle. And it was, it was hell on wheels. But of course, that whole story got pushed under the carpet, sort of covered up. He and I kept working on this. He finally gets someone who brings him a 0-point device, solid state, no moving parts. And I said, Gene, we need to get this out to the public very quickly. Oh no, they want to keep it secret. I begged him and I begged him and I begged him and I begged him. He was beaten to death when he was over at his parents' home and was killed, murdered. Made to look like some thugs. They were thugs, but it wasn't a random murder. And the device vanished with him. Good friend of mine, dear friend. Next. This gentleman, this goes way back, 80s and 90s. Now, I like this story. I want to tell you something about this. We could do a whole hour presentation on this because I was intimately involved. After he passed away, this inventor, he had a car that would run on water, but it had to be modified. And he always kept that secret. He had a patent that he falsified the voltage and the frequency, cycles per second, on the electronics because he didn't want anyone to reproduce it and leapfrog him financially. Again, this crazy inventor syndrome. And what happened, and when he passed away, there was a whole warehouse full of floppy disks and papers and everything. And his heirs wanted to sell it off. So I got invited in, and my science advisor, who was a professor at the University of New Hampshire, went there. And what people didn't realize is that this car was the least important thing Stan Meyer had. He had a toroid, and the toroid was a donut-shaped electromagnetic device that had had a national security order slapped on it. Because I was going to get it and openly disclose it, because I won't tell you why. Those guys know they don't tangle with me, clean their clock. So I'm nice until I'm not nice, and I won't tell you how that goes. But yeah, just be aware. So what happened? I used to have gang members with Tech 10s in the ER in my face, telling them they're going to kill me. I go, yeah. These light and the loafer guys at the agency. So, from Yale. Sorry, but I'm going to go off script a bit here. But, so he had this. Now, what people didn't realize, at the time, I knew that this was a disaster. Because I only had a limited amount of money at that time in my project. We had a few $100,000 we were going to offer, but we made it clear we were going to open source it. Well, they had an engineering group from Michigan come in, the heirs for Stan Meyer's material, who had a lot more money because they had a big backer. And they were going to monetize it, keep it secret, try to repatent it, all the usual crazy ideas, which would be great if you're just developing a new software program, but not something that's going to change the world forever. Can't do it. So those guys got it, and they were working on a couple years. I get this hysterical call from, I won't say who it is, a Lord somebody out of the British Isles. He says, Dr. Greer, we need your help. We need your help. It was hysterical. He had been the big deep pockets funding that engineering group in Michigan. He says they're on the run for their lives. They've been sabotaged. They've had death threats. So I wrote, I'll give it to anyone who needs to see it, I think a 3 or 4 page strategic paper, what they needed to do within 24 hours. And my advice was, forget about Gollum and be in my ring, in my precious ring. In this case, it was literally a precious ring. Toroid, donut-shaped thing. And just put it out there. I will help spread it. We will build these up independently, have labs tested, and every A-list celebrity I know will have their house and their car running on it. And you cannot put that toothpaste back in the tube. You squeeze it hard enough. He says, yes, you're right. It's probably the only way. But they think they can find a safe country to go to. I said, you're going to have to go to another star system, my friend. I literally said that. No way that's going to happen. So sure enough, I find out a few months later, I'm meeting with a high-tech guy in Orange County. That entire team was assassinated. The one survived. It was just crying like a baby in this man's office. And I said, I'm trying to, get, you can imagine the frustration, 31 years of this that I've gone through. But this guy really did have a car ran on water. And of course, the exhaust is what? Water vapor. So you split H2O into hydrogen and oxygen, and the exhaust is water vapor. But the magic is something else. Next. He was murdered. He was poisoned when he was meeting with a bunch of CIA people. Listen to this.
Dream becoming a reality. A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy. And as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
Oops.
Water has always been considered a precious commodity, but Stan Meyer's invention may make it even more valuable. He has developed what's called a water fuel cell. It has taken the place of his old gas tank. The water fuel cell breaks down water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is used to run his dune buggy.
I don't care if you use rainwater, well water, city water, ocean water. If you don't have any fresh water, go ahead and use snow. If you don't have any snow available to you, they use salt water because there's no adverse effect to the fuel cell.
Myers started working on this project 4 years ago. He's not a scientist. He isn't even a chemist. In fact, he never graduated from college. Myers was determined, he says, to design something to protect this country from oil embargoes.
And we have calculated that if we take the dune buggy from Los Angeles to New York, we would roughly use 22 gallons of water.
The Pentagon flew a Lieutenant Colonel in last week to look at Myers' invention. There's talk of possibly using it in the Star Wars defense program and to run army tanks. Myers is currently perfecting a water fuel cell for cars. It will cost about $1,500. He says it won't need any maintenance, and you won't have to replace it. It'll be at least 2 years before the fuel system goes into mass production. The day it happens will be one the fuel industry hates, but it'll put a smile on the face of those who've had to say at one time or another, fill her up. I'm Ralph Robinson.
As you can see, many patents have already been received, and many more are forthcoming. To date, over 42 patents have been applied for.
Yeah, okay. So this sort of encapsulates, 5 or 10 of the suppression techniques, all the way from murder to crazy inventor syndrome, falsifying your patent, trying to make money first instead of proving the science first, etc. And, of course, he took this to his grave. He was poisoned and killed at a Cracker Barrel. An ignominious death, if ever I heard one. And it's lost to posterity now because the people who outbid my group, I didn't have any big financial backers, they got it, and it's all vanished now, and they're all dead. So that's what's happened. Then we have this brilliant man. He passed away a few years ago. This physicist had developed these charged clusters. And basically what they are, they've been likened to little tiny microscopic ball lightnings. And when you discharge them, and this is what we're going to get this in a moment, is what Stan Meyer was doing. He didn't know it. It actually taps into and cavitates, creates a path into this infinite 0-point energy field, this vast amount of energy field. And that's why when he said, when Stan Meyer said you can take 22 gallons, there's not enough hydrogen and oxygen in 22 gallons of water to go across the United States. It's because most of the energy that was firing the pistons was coming from the 0 point. I said that back in the 90s. He didn't know it. But I said, no, what he's doing with a very high voltage VHV system is that he didn't know it on a nano level, like it's been proven recently. We're going to show you. That he was getting energy only partially from burning hydrogen and oxygen. Most of the motive force and energy was actually coming from these tiny microscopic ball lightnings that would discharge and would cause a force, an energy force that would move the piston, right? And he didn't know that. Now this guy, he had a better idea. He actually proved his technology at the University of Illinois and also a university in Tokyo. I personally met with the CEO of his company back some years ago in Washington in the early 2000s. And at that time, Richardson, the Secretary of Energy, had been governor of New Mexico, was the Department of Energy cabinet secretary for Bill Clinton. And so I met with this CEO, and he says, yes, they approved a $5 million grant from DOE so we could develop this further, because one of the effects it had that they were really pursuing was putting low-level, initially, radioactive waste in these charged clusters, and it would cause isotopes that were non-radioactive to be created. What does this mean? You clean up all the radioactive waste. However, the phenomenon, the reason it was doing it was that it was actually activating, as it were, this baseline energy field that's at the fabric of space and time. And that's what they didn't want out. So in the rarest of events, that grant was published, and these vicious people who want to keep all this stuff secret went into the Secretary of Energy's office and said, pull that grant. And they pulled it. And I met with the CEO of his company and said, we're out. That's what happened to this. Next. And this, I mentioned John Bedini, but I was at his lab, 50 watts in and 772 watts out. We saw it, tested it. Now again, he would publish things that were kind of not quite how to do it, because he said, and I said, why don't you just disclose the whole 9 yards? All of it. He says, I've been roughed up and almost killed once. I don't want to be killed. So he passed away, just a few years ago. Next. And then there's this wonderful man, a real hero of mine. He was the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs. So you'd have the director of the lab and then another person and this guy. I mean, he was always in the vice president's office and other places. And he actually brought me into the Naval Research Labs to see things that fly and float. You're going to see this in a minute. Electrogravitic. High voltage systems that cause an electromagnetic field and things for flying. This guy is brilliant. He introduced me to, and let's see the next slide, to a man near the Redstone Arsenal. Now this man, I'm not going to use his name yet, but a few years ago I put him under contract to build a stationary, not flying, device so that we could at least have a level 1 device released to the scientific community and the public to get this ball rolling. And what was spooky about this is that, he had stayed at my home, I'd been down there. He worked for IT&T under a contract. It was CIA, but they went through IT&T. What happened? So I go down there, I meet with his main shepherd. A shepherd is the guy who holds your clearances, security clearances. And he was a retired colonel and now a civilian. He says, so long as you don't do things that fly, because that's a missile delivery system, we'll get to that in a moment, he's been cleared to work with you on this. I said, great. So we give him a bunch of money, say, here, do this. A few weeks later, he's setting up his lab, and he has a SCIF, a secure communication information facility, underneath his house. and at this place near Redstone. I've been, so he starts putting this thing together, and the director of the CIA that I had briefed, who turned on us, Woolsey, went down there with some thugs and threatened him and his wife. And he's an engineer, you know, he's just your average middle-aged guy. And he goes, I'm out. So we lost all our money and didn't get a device either. But that guy was amazing. Now, the fascinating thing about Mr. Foch is that Foch, if he had been known in the public domain, would probably be the most accomplished aerospace guy of his generation. He passed away a few years ago of prostate cancer, unfortunately, a very dear friend. But you read between the lines here. We've gotten so close, but the fly in the ointment of what I did, and I didn't want to do it. What I wanted them to do is to hand off the information and let's open source it and this and that. He says, no, let's do it this way. And that was the last time I funded something like that, because it doesn't work. It's got to be, from the minute you start experimenting with it, it's got to be live streamed, the whole damn thing, every minute. You have to have the whole world. It's like in the 60s. The whole world's watching. The whole world's watching. That's what we have to do with this technology. Cannot run it like any other R&D project if you're going to actually get around these petrofascists. Next. And then you have this fantastic guy. He's so amazing. He's a Harvard physicist. He had a fairly low temperature, I think 2,000 or 3,000 degree plasma, but highly magnetically charged. And those plasmas can tap into this energy field just like the little ball lightnings and this sort of thing. And we went to his place. He was at that time outside Tampa. He had left Harvard. The thing was amazing. And it created, you could put waste material like antifreeze or junk into this thing, like an incinerator, through this plasma. We saw it. And out would come just some carbon material and a type of magnetically charged gas, hydrogen gas that you could burn and run anything. Very clean, very efficient. No emissions from the system, no pollution. So this is how you clean up the planet. You take all the garbage, run it through one of these things, it's just turned into some carbonaceous material. The outgassing of this magnetically charged gas runs factories, runs whatever. You don't need to fill landfills. This would have solved that problem. He couldn't get any help. He had fled and went back to Italy. Very, very interesting story. Now, what he didn't tell people, my science advisor went in there. He says, here's something I can't put in a journal. Now, listen to this stuff. When they analyzed the effluent, the carbon and the sort of powdery stuff that came out, we saw it. They found platinum, gold, and other metals in it, even though none of that was in the stuff going in. And what he knew was happening, he was a physicist, is that the magnetic field of this particular very special plasma, which he also kept secret, would take, an atom with its electron shell, it would cause the electron shell to kind of form a toroid, a ring, and the nuclei would be exposed and they would recombine. It's transmutation of the elements, literally. Now, I know this has also been done in other projects. So, of course, that's a big story because, you're going to buy gold for 2,000 an ounce. Actually, tick, 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 at certain frequencies, there you have it. Right? It's a whole new world coming. You're going to see this in a minute. Next. This is a man, Dr. Randolph Mills, another brilliant guy, had this company called Blacklight Power. It was all in the media. It was basically using a type of, not really cold fusion, but something similar with what he called hydrinos from hydrogen, putting out 50 kilowatts of energy for only 1 cent a kilowatt hour at the cost of it. And it was no pollution at all. He had $100 million in funding placement. I begged him to open source it. I begged him to disclose it. I told him, you cannot do it this way. You have a $800 trillion gorilla that's going to stop you. Guess what? It vanished, and all the money too.